I'm Mackenzie, 33, and I run what my family mockingly calls that little antique shop in Boston. For years, they've dismissed my passion while praising my sister Rachel's law career. What they didn't know is that behind my modest lifestyle lies a $15 million fortune I've quietly built. I arrived at Thanksgiving with my usual trepidation and simple gifts, never expecting everything to implode. When Rachel borrowed my phone and saw a banking notification, her shocked expression told me my secret was out. As my family gathered around the turkey, I watched my carefully constructed world crumble. If you've ever had family judge your success before knowing the whole story, drop a like and subscribe. Let me know where you're watching from. I could use some allies as I tell you how my Thanksgiving turned into a battlefield over money nobody knew I had. Growing up in suburban Massachusetts, I learned early that appearances mattered more than authenticity in the Barrett household. My parents, Thomas and Elaine, had specific ideas about success, prestigious degrees, conventional careers, and the kind of achievements you could brag about at neighborhood barbecues. My father worked as a bank manager, my mother as a high school administrator. We lived comfortably in a colonial-style house with a manicured lawn and hosted dinner parties where everyone wore pressed clothes and perfect smiles. Then there was Rachel, my older sister by 3 years. From the moment she brought home her first straight-A report card, she became the golden standard against which I was measured. Rachel checked every box on my parents' success checklist: valedictorian, Ivy League law degree, marriage to Derek, a dermatologist with his own practice, and 2 children with impeccable manners and private school educations. Their family Christmas cards looked like Ralph Lauren advertisements. Your sister made partner at 32, my mother would remind me during our monthly calls. The youngest female partner in the firm's history. This fact was repeated so often it might as well have been embroidered on our family crest. My interests diverged early. While Rachel joined debate club and student government, I spent hours in our town's small historical society, fascinated by artifacts from colonial New England. I'd trace my fingers over glass cases containing Revolutionary War-era buttons and handwritten letters, imagining the stories behind each item. The elderly curator, Mrs. Abernathy, noticed my fascination and began teaching me about preservation, provenance, and the hidden language of antiques. "You have the eye," she told me once. "Some people can look at an old chair and just see wood. You see the hands that crafted it, the people who sat in it, the history it witnessed." When I announced my intention to study art history in college, my father's disappointment was palpable. "What exactly do you plan to do with that degree?" he asked, not looking up from his newspaper. "Museums pay nothing, you know." "I'm not sure yet," I admitted. "But it's what I love." "Love doesn't pay the mortgage," he replied, effectively ending the conversation. I chose a state university with a solid art history program, a decision that prompted frequent comparisons to Rachel's Ivy League pedigree. During family dinners, my parents would steer conversations toward Rachel's law school accomplishments, while my summer internship at the Museum of Fine Arts was mentioned only in passing, if at all. After graduation, I worked at an auction house for 3 years, absorbing everything I could about valuation, authentication, and the art market. My supervisors noted my unusual ability to spot overlooked treasures, but my salary remained modest. When I announced my plan to open an antique shop at 25, my family's reaction was predictably dismissive. "Playing store," my mother called it, as if I were a child setting up a lemonade stand. "It's a tough business," my father warned. "Most small retailers fail within the first year." Rachel was more blunt. "You're wasting your education on a hobby. No one gets rich selling other people's junk." I found a small storefront in Boston's historic North End, in a narrow brick building with uneven floors and exposed beams. The rent stretched my savings thin, but something about the space felt right. I named it Timeless Treasures and spent weeks refinishing the interior, installing antique display cases I'd rescued from a closing department store, and cataloging my initial inventory. The shop opened with little fanfare. My parents attended the opening but spent most of the evening talking to Rachel and Derek about their recent vacation to Bermuda. I overheard my mother apologizing to a family friend. "It's just a phase. She'll find her real career eventually." For 8 years, this perception persisted. At every family gathering, my profession was treated as a temporary diversion, something to be tolerated until I found a real job. The questions became predictable. "Is that little shop still keeping the lights on?" My father. "Have you thought about getting your teaching certificate as a backup?" My mother. "Don't you get bored sitting there all day waiting for customers?" Rachel. What they didn't understand, what I never explained, was that I had found my calling. Each piece that passed through my shop had a story, a lineage, a soul. I could look at a tarnished silver teapot and recognize its Georgian craftsmanship, or identify a Massachusetts-made Chippendale chair from subtle details in its carvings. This knowledge wasn't just academic, it had practical value that my family couldn't see. Every Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Easter followed the same script. Rachel would hold court in the living room, detailing her latest legal triumph or her children's achievements. I would help in the kitchen, assigned to peeling potatoes or setting the table, occasionally asked perfunctory questions about the shop, but never given space to truly answer. "We worry about your retirement," my mother would say, stirring cranberry sauce. "Rachel's firm has an excellent 401k match." These gatherings left me emotionally drained, driving back to Boston with a hollow feeling in my chest. In my apartment above the shop, surrounded by the treasures I'd kept for my personal collection, I'd allow myself to acknowledge the hurt. But by morning, I'd push it aside and return to work, to the world where my knowledge was respected and my passion understood. What my family never knew was that beneath their dismissal, I was building something extraordinary. Something that would eventually shatter their perception of me in a single Thanksgiving moment. The first time I realized I could turn my knowledge into serious money happened almost by accident. 3 years after opening my shop, I was browsing a weekend estate sale in Brookline, fighting rain and early morning chill. The house belonged to a recently deceased professor, and most of the valuable items had already been claimed by family members. What remained was being liquidated by a company that specialized in quick turnover rather than careful assessment. In the basement, leaning against a water heater, I spotted a small, darkened oil painting in a tarnished frame. The liquidator had marked it at $50, assuming it was a worthless reproduction. But something about the brushwork caught my eye, the confident strokes, the luminous quality of light. I bought it without haggling, along with some vintage books to avoid drawing attention to my interest in the painting. After careful cleaning and research, I confirmed my suspicion. It was an early work by a significant 19th century American landscape artist, worth approximately $120,000. I sold it through a small auction house in New York for $145,000, minus their commission. This was my first significant windfall, but not my last. I developed a system, visiting estate sales in wealthy New England towns, developing relationships with house clearance specialists, and occasionally traveling to rural auctions where sophisticated buyers were scarce. I learned to look for items with specific characteristics that suggested hidden value, quality that transcended fashion, historical significance overlooked by generalist appraisers, or works by artists on the cusp of rediscovery. One rainy Tuesday, an elderly man brought in a cardboard box of old papers he'd found while clearing his aunt's attic. Among musty recipes and faded letters was a folded document with a barely legible signature. I recognized it immediately as a Revolutionary War-era letter written by a significant historical figure. I paid him $75 for the entire box. 6 months later, after authentication and careful restoration, that document sold to a private collector for $600,000. These weren't everyday occurrences, but they happened often enough. A Tiffany lamp purchased for $200 at a church rummage sale sold for $25,000. A collection of early photography I acquired for $350 was worth over $40,000 to the Wright Museum. A seemingly ordinary desk from a university surplus sale contained a hidden compartment with Civil War-era gold coins. I became strategic about my success. In the small world of New England antique dealers, I maintained a reputation as a knowledgeable but modest shop owner. I sold my most valuable discoveries through larger auction houses in New York or through private dealers, keeping my name off the provenance. The money went into investment accounts managed by a discreet financial advisor who specialized in helping entrepreneurs maintain low profiles. My lifestyle remained unchanged. I drove the same reliable Toyota I'd had since college. My wardrobe consisted primarily of quality basics: Goodwill sweaters, well-made jeans, and comfortable boots. I took simple pleasures in good coffee, interesting books, and occasional dinners at neighborhood restaurants where I knew the owners. My most significant indulgence was traveling to Europe once a year, ostensibly for buying trips, but really to visit museums and historical sites that fed my passion for history. The only substantial change in my circumstances came 5 years ago when the owner of my building decided to sell. Fearing displacement, I used some of my capital to purchase not just my storefront, but the entire historic building through an LLC that couldn't be easily traced back to me. The 4-story brick structure gave me security and eventually additional income from the other commercial and residential units. By the time of last year's Thanksgiving, my net worth had quietly grown to just over $15 million. The bulk was in diversified investments, with smaller portions in real estate, rare books, and a carefully curated personal collection of antiques too special to sell. My financial advisor had recently congratulated me on reaching this milestone with a text message, the same message that would ultimately expose my secret. I had specific reasons for keeping my wealth private. Initially, it was simple business sense. In the antiquing world, showing too much prosperity can make sellers raise their prices or attract competitors to your sources. But as time passed, my silence became more personal. Each dismissive comment from my family had built a wall between us. Each time they minimized my career as cute or quaint, I added another brick. Their perception of me as the underachieving daughter had calcified, and in some perverse way, I'd grown attached to it. As the unsuccessful sister, at least I was free from expectations. No one asked me for financial advice or loans. No one expected me to fund family vacations or children's college funds. More importantly, the few relationships I maintained outside my family were genuine. My small circle of friends, other shop owners in the North End, a couple of museum curators, my upstairs tenant who taught art at a community college, liked me for myself, not my bank account. In a world where I'd learned to spot fakes and forgeries, these authentic connections were priceless. I'd occasionally considered revealing the truth, especially after particularly condescending family gatherings. But something always held me back: fear that money would transform me from disappointing daughter to family bank, that any subsequent warmth would be tainted by financial interest. So I maintained my modest facade, showing up to family events with simple gifts and quiet stories about interesting items that had passed through my shop. I listened to Rachel's monologues about her firm's high-profile cases and her children's private school achievements. I helped my mother in the kitchen and discussed baseball with my father. I played my assigned role in the family drama, until last Thanksgiving when everything changed. I woke before dawn on Thanksgiving Day, anxiety already churning in my stomach. The weather matched my mood, gray and threatening, with a sharp wind that scattered the last brittle leaves across the cobblestones of the North End. I'd baked cranberry bread the night before and carefully wrapped 3 vintage books I'd found for my niece and nephew, knowing they'd probably prefer electronic gifts, but hoping to share a bit of my world with them. The drive to my parents' suburban home took longer than usual due to holiday traffic. Rachel's gleaming SUV already occupied the prime spot in the driveway when I arrived, forcing me to park on the street. Through the bay window, I could see my mother laughing at something Rachel was saying, her hand resting affectionately on my sister's shoulder. I sat in my car for an extra moment, rehearsing the mental script I'd developed over years of family gatherings. Smile politely, deflect personal questions, show interest in others, and escape as soon as socially acceptable. With the cranberry bread and gifts balanced precariously in my arms, I made my way to the front door. "There she is," my mother exclaimed as I entered, her voice carrying the slightly too enthusiastic tone she used when she was trying to be encouraging. "Rachel just got here too." Perfect timing. My sister looked up from her phone, her smile professional and practiced. At 36, Rachel maintained the polished appearance of a woman featured in business magazines, sleek bob, subtle makeup, and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly utility bills. "The shop girl arrives," she said, using the nickname she knew I disliked. "How's retail treating you during the holiday rush?" "Getting lots of customers looking for dusty treasures." "It's steady," I replied, the standard answer that neither invited further questions nor gave any real information. "How are the kids?" This predictably launched Rachel into a detailed account of Sophia's violin recital and Max's soccer championship. I nodded at appropriate intervals while helping my mother in the kitchen, where she immediately assigned me to vegetable prep while she worked on more complex dishes. My father entered, already holding his traditional pre-dinner scotch. "There's my girls," he said, kissing Rachel on the cheek before giving me an awkward side hug. "How's business, Mackenzie?" "Still keeping afloat." "I'm doing fine, Dad," I said, focusing on perfectly dicing celery for the stuffing. That's good," he replied absently. "Did Rachel tell you about the Anderson case?" Made the front page of the Boston Globe business section. And so it went, the familiar choreography of our family dynamic. Rachel's husband Derek arrived with the children, who politely thanked me for the books before setting them aside in favor of their tablets. My brother-in-law immediately launched into a story about a celebrity client at his dermatology practice, careful to mention the caliber of the restaurants where they'd subsequently had lunch. Around 3 o'clock, as food preparation reached its critical stage, Rachel's constant phone notifications became a source of irritation for my mother. "Rachel, please put that thing away or silence it," she said, exasperated after a particularly loud ping interrupted her gravy instructions. "Sorry, Mom, but I'm waiting for an important email about the Peterson merger," Rachel replied. "Battery's almost dead anyway." "Hey, Mac, can I borrow your phone? Mine's about to die, and I need to check my email." Before I could object, she'd spotted my phone on the counter where I'd placed it while washing cranberries. Rachel picked it up, and I thought nothing of it, until I remembered the text notification that had arrived that morning from my financial advisor, still unread on my lock screen. Time seemed to slow as I watched Rachel's expression transform, from casual interest to confusion, then widening shock as she read, "Congratulations on surpassing the $15 million mark this quarter. Your diversification strategy is paying off nicely. Let's discuss next steps for the property acquisition when you're back from the holiday." "What the hell is this?" Rachel's voice cut through the kitchen noise. She turned the phone toward me, her hand shaking slightly. $15 million? Is this some kind of joke?" My mother stopped stirring the gravy. My father lowered his scotch glass. The kitchen fell silent except for the timer on the oven, its cheerful beeping suddenly absurd in the tension. "Rachel, give me my phone," I said quietly, reaching for it. She pulled it back. "No, I want to know what this means." "Are you in some kind of trouble? Money laundering?" "Because if you're involved in something illegal, I need to know before it affects my reputation at the firm." The immediate assumption that any wealth I possessed must be illegitimate stung more than I expected. "It's not illegal," I said, feeling a strange calm descend. "It's mine. I earned it. Now please give me back my phone." My father stepped forward. "What's going on?" "Mackenzie, What is Rachel talking about? Rachel thrust the phone toward him. Apparently your struggling shop girl is sitting on $15 million she never bothered to mention to any of us. My father's eyes widened as he read the message, then looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before, a disconcerting mixture of shock, confusion, and something that looked unsettlingly like calculation. Is this true? He asked. The moment I'd unconsciously feared for years had arrived. My carefully constructed separation between family and finances had collapsed in an instant. I took a deep breath. Yes, it's true. I've been successful in my business. More successful than I've let on. Successful? Rachel laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. That's like calling the ocean a bit wet. $15 million while you've been showing up here in thrift store clothes, letting us think you were barely scraping by? That's not success, that's deception. I never said I was struggling, I countered, feeling defensive. You all assumed that. My mother, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. Dinner's ready. Everyone to the table. We can discuss this while we eat. It was such a typically maternal response. No matter the crisis, meals must proceed on schedule, that I almost laughed. But the gravity in her voice suggested this wasn't an attempt to change the subject, merely to relocate the confrontation. We moved to the dining room in silence, the elaborate Thanksgiving spread suddenly insignificant. As we took our seats, I noticed Derek whispering to Rachel, his expression intense. The children, sensing the tension, became unusually quiet, eyes darting between the adults. My father cleared his throat after a painfully silent prayer. I think we deserve an explanation, Mackenzie. And so, as the turkey grew cold and the gravy congealed, I gave them the abbreviated version, my eye for undervalued items, the significant finds, the strategic investments. I explained how I'd built my fortune piece by piece, find by find, investment by investment. Instead of the grudging respect I might have hoped for, each revelation seemed to fuel their indignation. Rachel's face flushed deeper red with every detail. My parents exchanged glances loaded with unspoken communication. Derek kept taking out his phone, typing figures into a calculator app. So, all these years, Rachel finally interrupted, while we've been worried about you, feeling sorry for you with your little shop, you've been secretly a millionaire? Laughing at us behind our backs. I wasn't laughing at anyone, I said. I just kept my business to myself. Family doesn't keep secrets like this, my mother said, her voice trembling. Family shares their blessings. Like you've shared in my interests all these years? The words escaped before I could stop them. Every time I tried to talk about my work, you changed the subject to Rachel's latest achievement. That's not fair, my father interjected. We were concerned about your future. If we'd known you were doing well, you would have what? I asked. Suddenly been interested in antiques? Stopped calling it playing store. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. My nephew asked if he could be excused to watch television, and Rachel nodded absently, her eyes never leaving my face. I think, she said finally, her lawyer voice emerging, that we need to have a serious family discussion about this. In the living room. Now. As we abandoned the Thanksgiving feast my mother had spent days preparing, I knew we were heading into a conversation that would permanently alter our family dynamic. What I didn't yet realize was just how nakedly it would reveal what my family really thought of me and what they believed they were entitled to. The transition from dining room to living room felt like walking from one courtroom to another. Rachel led the procession, her back rigid with indignation. My parents followed, exchanging whispers I couldn't quite catch. Derek instructed the children to stay upstairs with their tablets. Adult conversation, he explained with artificial cheerfulness. I trailed behind, a defendant approaching the bench. Our family living room had remained largely unchanged since my childhood. The same overstuffed sofa and matching armchairs, arranged around a coffee table perpetually stacked with home design magazines no one ever read. The only updates were the progressively larger school photos of Rachel's children on the mantle, chronicling their growth from toddlers to preteens in matching outfits and practice smiles. Rachel took the central position on the sofa, my parents flanking her like supporting counsel. Derek chose the armchair nearest my sister, leaving me the seat furthest from the group. The physical arrangement wasn't subtle, 4-against-1. I think we need complete transparency now, Rachel began, her professional tone barely masking her emotion. Exactly how much money are we talking about, and in what forms? The presumptuous "we" wasn't lost on me. I don't see how the specifics are relevant, I replied. It's my personal financial information. It became relevant the moment we discovered you've been hiding millions while watching the rest of us struggle, Rachel shot back. Struggle. I couldn't help but laugh. Rachel, you make over $300,000 a year. Derek's practice brings in more than that. You vacation in the Maldives and drive a car that costs more than some houses. We have expenses you can't imagine, Derek interjected. Private school tuition for 2 children is over $60,000 annually. The country club membership is another $40,000. The vacation property in Vermont. Rachel's student loans are still over $100,000 despite a decade of payments. Those are choices, not struggles, I pointed out. My mother leaned forward, her expression pained. Mackenzie, please. This hostile attitude isn't helping. We're just trying to understand why you kept such a significant secret from people who love you. Her words might have moved me if my father hadn't immediately followed with $15 million. Good God. And here we've been concerned about your retirement planning. All those conversations about whether you should get a real job with benefits. My job is real, I said firmly. It's always been real. The fact that you never respected it doesn't change that. That's unfair, my mother protested weakly. We just worried. Rachel had been uncharacteristically quiet for a moment, seemingly lost in calculation. When she spoke again, her voice had transformed to the trembling, emotional tone I recognized from her courtroom performances. Do you have any idea what that kind of money would mean for Sophia and Max? Tears welled in her eyes. Sophia's showing real promise with violin. She could study abroad, attend Juilliard. And Max might need special tutoring for his dyslexia. The good programs cost a fortune. I blinked, surprised. I didn't know Max had dyslexia. We just got the diagnosis, Rachel continued, seizing on my moment of sympathy. The specialists, the programs, insurance barely covers any of it. Meanwhile, you're sitting on a fortune that you, as a single woman with no children, can't possibly need all for yourself. And there it was, the first direct suggestion that my money should be redistributed according to their perception of need. Derek nodded eagerly. Even a small portion, say $5 million, invested properly could secure the children's future and help with Rachel's student debt. You'd still have $10 million left. More than enough for one person. The casual way he proposed dividing my life's work, as if cutting a pie at dinner, left me momentarily speechless. My father cleared his throat. Now, let's not get ahead of ourselves. But Mackenzie, you have to understand our shock. All these years, your mother and I worried about you. We even set aside a fund to help you if your shop failed. Not much, just $20,000 we could spare. We sacrificed to put you through college, hoping you'd find a stable career. I paid back every cent of my college expenses, I reminded him. 3 years after graduation. I sent checks monthly until it was cleared. That's not the point, my mother interjected. Family supports each other. If one has abundance, they share with those in need. And I'm supposed to believe Rachel is in need? I asked incredulously. Rachel's eyes narrowed. It's not about being destitute. It's about family obligation. If our positions were reversed, I would help you without hesitation. I doubted this deeply but kept the thought to myself. The children's education alone, Derek continued, as if I hadn't spoken. Harvard undergraduate is projected to cost nearly $500,000 per child by the time they're ready. then graduate school. The real issue, Rachel said, wiping away a strategic tear, is that you've been deceiving us while accumulating wealth that could benefit the entire family. If you really loved us, you would want to share your good fortune. The emotional manipulation was so transparent, I almost admired its boldness. Almost. I earned every dollar through knowledge and work you all dismissed for years, I said quietly. Now suddenly my career is valid because it produced money? Don't be dramatic, Rachel sighed. No one is asking for all of it. Just a reasonable portion to help family. That's what normal people do. Normal people don't demand others' money simply because they've discovered it exists, I countered. My father, always the pragmatist, tried a different approach. Think of it as an investment in your niece and nephew. Family legacy. Your money would be going to the next generation, not just disappearing. For the next hour, the conversation circled these themes: family obligation, the children's needs, and increasingly specific suggestions for how my money should be allocated. Rachel mentioned a potential investment opportunity through a law firm client, guaranteed 20% returns, but the buy-in is $2 million minimum. My father suggested I purchase vacation property the whole family could use. Derek wondered aloud if I might provide the down payment for a larger house they'd been considering. With each suggestion, the pretense of family concern grew thinner, revealing the naked entitlement beneath. Not once did anyone ask what I wanted to do with my own money. Not once did anyone acknowledge that perhaps I had earned the right to decide its allocation. The breaking point came when Rachel, frustrated by my continued resistance, finally showed her hand completely. You don't even need it, she snapped. Look at how you live, that tiny apartment above your shop, those second-hand clothes, that car you've had forever. You live like a pauper anyway. The money is wasted on you. The room fell silent. Even my parents seemed taken aback by the nakedness of the statement. I think, I said, rising from my chair, that this conversation is over. Sit down, Rachel demanded. We're not finished. Actually, we are. I moved toward the door. If you walk out now, Rachel called after me, don't expect things to be the same. Family works both ways, Mackenzie. You can't just take and never give back. I turned at the doorway. What exactly have I taken from you, Rachel? She faltered for a moment before recovering. Years of concern, worry, emotional support. Interesting. I must have missed all that support between the condescension and dismissal. My mother stood, distress evident on her face. Please, girls. It's Thanksgiving. Let's not say things we'll regret. But it was too late for that. Years of unspoken resentment had broken through the surface, and there would be no returning to polite pretense. I need you to make a decision right now, Rachel said, her voice cold. Either you help your family the way family should, or you're choosing money over blood. It's that simple. It wasn't simple. Nothing about family ever is. But in that moment, facing 4 people who had suddenly revealed how they truly saw me, not as a person, but as a resource to be tapped, the path forward clarified with painful brightness. Goodbye, I said simply. Happy Thanksgiving. As I walked out into the cold November evening, the sound of Rachel's angry protests faded behind me. In my car, hands shaking slightly on the wheel, I realized I was simultaneously devastated and relieved, like someone who has finally put down an impossibly heavy burden they'd been carrying for years. The 20-mile drive back to Boston became a journey through both space and memory. As rain began to spatter against my windshield, each swipe of the wipers seemed to clear away not just water, but years of accumulated pretense. Traffic crawled along the highway, giving me unwanted time to replay the afternoon's events and decades of family dynamics that had led to this moment. I remembered my 8th grade art history presentation, how excited I'd been to share my passion with my family, the careful research I'd done on Vermeer, the handmade visual aids I'd created. My parents had attended only because the event coincided with Rachel's debate team finals in the same school. They'd sat through my presentation with polite disinterest, checking their watches repeatedly, then erupted in genuine enthusiasm when Rachel won her competition. "That's our girl," my father had cheered, while I stood nearby holding my excellent certificate that no one asked to see. I recalled my college graduation, where my parents had spent most of the celebration dinner discussing Rachel's law school acceptance, my accomplishments relegated to brief acknowledgments between more important conversations. The pattern continued through the opening of my shop, my 30th birthday, every holiday and family gathering, a consistent message that my path was less valuable, my achievements less significant, my personhood somehow secondary. By the time I reached Boston, the rain had intensified into a deluge that matched my emotional state. Instead of turning toward my shop in the North End, I found myself driving to Carson Beach in South Boston. The parking lot was deserted. No one else was foolish enough to visit the shore in a November downpour. I sat in my car watching waves crash against the empty beach, rain drumming on the roof, and finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. Tears came, not gentle or cleansing, but wrenching sobs that left me gasping. I cried for the family I had wished for all these years, for the conditional love that had been exposed tonight, and for the final shattering of the illusion that things might someday change. An hour passed before the storm, both outside and within me, began to subside. As my breathing steadied, a strange calm descended. I had spent my life seeking approval from people fundamentally incapable of giving it. The realization was both devastating and liberating. I drove to my shop in the North End, climbing the narrow stairs to my apartment above. The space had always been my sanctuary, walls lined with bookshelves holding my most treasured volumes, windows overlooking the historic street below, and carefully chosen pieces from my personal collection displayed in thoughtful arrangements. My parents had visited exactly once, 8 years ago, commenting primarily on the lack of square footage and outdated kitchen appliances. That night, I slept fitfully, waking several times to check my phone. There were multiple missed calls and increasingly angry texts from Rachel, one confused message from my mother, and silence from my father. I turned the phone off and stared at the ceiling, watching shadows from street lamps create patterns in the darkness. By morning, a decision had crystallized. I showered, dressed in one of my second-hand outfits, actually a beautifully tailored vintage Chanel suit that had cost more than Rachel's monthly car payment, and prepared to open my shop as usual. Black Friday was typically busy, with tourists exploring the North End after Thanksgiving celebrations. Just before unlocking the door, my phone chimed with a final text from Rachel. "We need to finish our conversation. Derek and I have an investment opportunity that won't wait. $2 million minimum buy-in. Call immediately." Something inside me snapped. Not in breakdown, but in breakthrough. I called Rachel back immediately, surprising her enough that she answered on the first ring. "Finally," she began. "About the investment." "No," I interrupted, my voice steady. "I'm not calling about your investment opportunity. I'm calling to say this clearly, once and for all. Mackenzie, my entire life, I have watched you receive validation, support, and recognition while my choices were dismissed and my accomplishments ignored. When you thought I was struggling, you offered nothing but condescension. Now that you know I'm not, you offer nothing but entitlement. That's not fair." "Let me finish," I continued, a lifetime of unspoken thoughts finally finding voice. "Every dollar I have came from knowledge you mocked, work you belittled, and passion you dismissed. I identified Revolutionary War documents while you called my shop a cute hobby. I authenticated 19th century masterpieces while you asked when I would get a real job. I built a multi-million-dollar business while you treated me like a charity case." Silence on the other end. "The money you're so eager to claim represents thousands of hours of research, risk, and expertise. It represents every dismissive comment I've endured, every holiday I've been sidelined, every accomplishment that went unacknowledged. And now you believe you deserve it because we share DNA?" "Family helps family," she finally managed, but her voice lacked conviction. Family respects family, I countered. Family supports dreams, celebrates successes, and loves unconditionally. You have done none of these things. So you're choosing money over us? Over your niece and nephew. I'm choosing myself. Finally, the children are welcome in my life and my shop anytime. They always have been, though you've brought them exactly twice in 8 years. As for the money, not a penny goes to people who only valued me once they discovered my bank balance. You'll regret this, Rachel said, her voice cold. When mom and dad are older and need care, when the kids graduate and you're not welcome, when you're alone with nothing but your precious money and dusty antiques. I'd rather be alone with authenticity than surrounded by conditional love, I replied. Goodbye, Rachel. I ended the call and turned my phone off completely, my hands shaking but my mind clear. Then I unlocked my shop door, turned the sign to open, and welcomed the first customer of the day with a genuine smile that felt like my first honest expression in years. Behind the counter, I opened my leather-bound inventory book and began a new page. At the top, I wrote a title, After Thanksgiving. Below it, I started cataloging what I had lost and what I had gained in the past 24 hours. The losses were significant, but expected. The gains, self-respect, clarity, freedom from pretense, were only beginning to reveal their value. The weeks following Thanksgiving unfolded like the aftermath of a natural disaster, initial shock giving way to assessment of damage, followed by the slow process of rebuilding. December arrived with its customary New England chill, holiday decorations appearing throughout the North End like colorful defiance against winter's advance. I maintained radio silence with my family, though their presence intruded in digital form. Rachel had taken to posting cryptic social media updates clearly intended for my consumption. Some people confuse self-centeredness with independence, and family is about giving, not taking. My mother sent occasional text messages that walked a careful line between guilt-inducing and conciliatory. We miss you, and this isn't what family should be, and the children are asking about you. My father's silence spoke volumes. The only surprising communication came from my cousin Amanda, my mother's niece who lived in Seattle and rarely participated in family gatherings. Her message was simple, heard about Thanksgiving. Been on the receiving end of Rachel's entitlement myself. If you need an ally, I'm here. We'd never been particularly close, but her unexpected support arrived like a lifeline when I most needed one. 10 days after Thanksgiving, I consulted with my financial advisor, Martin, explaining the situation with clinical detachment as if discussing someone else's family drama. This happens more often than you'd think, he said, leaning back in his chair. Suddenly wealthy clients frequently face family members emerging with hands outstretched. It's why I generally advise financial privacy. Too late for that, I said ruefully. Moving forward, we should review your estate planning and security measures. Not that I expect anything drastic, but information is now out there that wasn't before. We spent 2 hours restructuring certain investments, securing accounts with additional verification measures, and reviewing my will, which had previously left significant portions to my niece and nephew in trust. I didn't remove them entirely, but I reduced the amounts and added conditions regarding education in arts and history. Are you concerned about potential legal challenges? Martin asked carefully. From my sister the lawyer? Always. There's no legal claim she could make, he assured me. Your money is unquestionably yours, earned through legitimate business. But that doesn't always prevent expensive nuisance suits designed to force settlements. I left his office with a renewed appreciation for the legal protections I'd established years ago, the LLC that owned my building, the business structure that shielded personal assets, the careful documentation of major transactions. What had once seemed like excessive precaution now felt like essential foresight. As Christmas approached, the question of holiday plans loomed large. For the first time in my adult life, I would not be attending my parents' traditional Christmas Eve dinner or their Christmas morning brunch. The realization brought both grief and relief. Grief for the family connection I had always hoped might improve, relief from the performance those gatherings had always required. One snowy evening in mid-December, sorting through a new acquisition of vintage holiday postcards, I found myself staring at idealized images of family gatherings from the early 1900s, smiling faces around fireplaces, perfectly decorated trees, the fantasy of familial harmony that has persisted through centuries. The gap between those images and my reality struck me with unexpected force. I closed the shop early and walked to my therapist's office through gently falling snow. Dr. Winters had been seeing me monthly for the past 2 years, initially to help process the loneliness that sometimes accompanied my chosen isolation, later evolving into deeper work on family dynamics and self-worth. "You've been preparing for this confrontation for years," she observed after I recounted the Thanksgiving events. "On some level, you always knew this moment would come." "I thought I'd feel more victorious," I admitted, finally showing them I wasn't the failure they thought. "Instead, I just feel sad." "You're grieving," she said simply. "Not just the family you've stepped away from, but the family you always wished they could be." We spent the session exploring the concept of family as I had experienced it versus how I might define it moving forward. Dr. Winters suggested an exercise, creating a list of people who had actually provided the support, validation, and unconditional positive regard that families ideally offer. The list I compiled over the following week surprised me with its length. Mrs. Abernathy from the Historical Society, who had first nurtured my interest in antiques, Professor Gladwell, who had mentored me through college, Sophie, who owned the bakery next to my shop and saved day-old pastries for me, Martin, who had guided my financial decisions without judgment, even regular customers who had shown more interest in my knowledge and passion than my family ever had. Family of choice, Dr. Winters called this network when I shared the list. Just as valid as family of origin, often healthier. As Christmas week arrived, I made a decision. Instead of spending the holiday alone, nursing resentment and loss, I would create a new tradition. I sent invitations to my family of choice for Christmas Eve dinner at my apartment. Nothing elaborate, just good food and genuine company. The weekend before Christmas, I received an unexpected email from my father, the first direct communication since Thanksgiving. "Mackenzie, your mother and I have been thinking about recent events. While we don't agree with all your choices, we recognize that communication broke down on all sides. Rachel remains upset, but your mother misses you terribly. Would you consider meeting for coffee, just the 3 of us, after the holidays? Dad." The message contained no apology, no acknowledgement of their role in what had transpired, but also no renewed demands or accusations. It was, perhaps, as close to conciliation as my father could manage. I replied that I would consider it after the new year, making no promises. On December 23rd, I closed the shop early to prepare for my Christmas Eve gathering. As I walked home through light snow, I passed a small community art center where I had occasionally taken classes. A sign advertised their youth scholarship program for underserved children interested in art history and preservation. Without hesitation, I walked in and made an anonymous donation of $50,000, the same program that had once provided me free summer workshops when my parents had refused to fund what they considered a useless interest. Christmas Eve arrived clear and cold, stars visible between Boston's historic buildings. My guests, Sophie from the bakery, Professor Gladwell and his husband, 2 fellow shop owners, and Martin with his daughter, filled my apartment with conversation and laughter that felt genuinely warm rather than performative. We ate well, exchanged modest gifts, and shared stories that celebrated rather than diminished each other's passions. As the evening wound down, I found myself by the window, watching snow begin to fall again on the street below. Professor Gladwell joined me, his voice gentle. "Penny, for your thoughts?" "I was just thinking about authenticity," I replied. "How rare and valuable it is, like the best antiques. You can't fake it convincingly." He nodded, the irony being that what your family covets, the money, came precisely from your authentic self, the part they never valued. There's a metaphor in there somewhere, I smiled. Indeed. He touched my shoulder lightly. For what it's worth, I've always thought you were extraordinary, not for what you accumulated, but for how you see the world. That eye for overlooked value, the respect for history's quieter stories. The money is just a byproduct. His words, so different from anything my family had ever offered, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I blinked them away, focusing on the snow transforming Boston into something softer, quieter, new. That night, after everyone had gone, I placed a small wrapped package under my modest tree, vintage first editions of favorite childhood books for my niece and nephew, inscribed with a simple message: the value of things isn't always visible at first glance. Love, Aunt Mackenzie. I would mail them after the holidays, a door left slightly open. As I prepared for bed, I realized I hadn't checked my phone all evening. No anxious monitoring for family messages, no dread of holiday guilt trips. The absence of that anxiety was perhaps the most valuable gift I had received this Christmas, the beginning of freedom from expectations I could never meet and approval I would never earn. 6 months after Thanksgiving, many things remained unresolved with my family. But within myself, something fundamental had shifted, a recognition that my worth had never been dependent on their assessment, and my future need not be constrained by their imagination. Spring in Boston brings a particular quality of light, clear and strengthening, illuminating the city's historic architecture with renewed clarity after winter's diffuse gray. 6 months after the Thanksgiving confrontation, I found myself in a similar state of increased clarity, both professionally and personally. The antique shop had undergone subtle transformations. For years, I had operated as a solo enterprise, partly from preference for solitude, partly from the practical advantage of keeping my methods private. But in February, I hired my first employee, Lily, a recent art history graduate with specialized knowledge of textile preservation and an enthusiasm that reminded me of my younger self. I can't believe I get to handle these pieces every day, she said one afternoon, carefully cataloging a collection of 18th century embroidered samplers. My family thinks I'm crazy for taking this job instead of something corporate. Mine too, I replied, the simple acknowledgement creating an unexpected bond between us. With Lily handling more of the day-to-day operations, I found time to pursue a project I'd been contemplating for years, creating detailed educational materials about antique authentication and valuation. What began as internal documentation evolved into workshops for serious collectors and eventually an online course that attracted unexpected interest from around the country. My relationship with my family remained complicated. The coffee meeting with my parents in January had been awkward, but not hostile. 3 people carefully navigating a minefield of unresolved hurts and divergent perspectives. My father, ever practical, seemed most concerned with establishing that I wouldn't be cutting them off entirely. We're still family, he said as we prepared to leave the cafe. Disagreements happen in every family. This was more than a disagreement, Dad, I replied quietly. It was a revelation about how you see me. He had no response to that, but when he hugged me goodbye, it felt less perfunctory than usual. My mother maintained contact through weekly text messages, updates about neighbors, questions about my health, carefully avoiding mention of Rachel or money. I responded with equal caution, sharing innocuous details about Boston weather and new acquisitions at the shop. It wasn't deep connection, but it was something, a tentative bridge being reconstructed from both sides. Rachel remained another matter entirely. After several attempts to reopen the investment opportunity discussion in January, she had shifted to a strategy of complete silence. Through my mother, I learned that she and Derek had purchased the larger house they wanted without my assistance, stretching their finances considerably in the process. The children still received birthday and holiday gifts from me, acknowledged by brief thank you notes, clearly written under parental supervision. In April, I received a surprising call from my father. He asked if he could visit the shop, alone, without my mother or Rachel. He arrived on a Tuesday morning, appearing somewhat out of place among the antiques in his golf shirt and khakis. "I've never really looked at this place," he admitted, studying a queen and secretary desk I had recently acquired. "It's more impressive than I imagined." I gave him a tour, explaining the stories behind select pieces, the Georgian silver service that had belonged to a Boston merchant family, the Civil War-era letters written by a nurse at Gettysburg, the early American portraiture by a female artist who had signed with only her initials to disguise her gender. "You really do know your stuff," he said, the surprise in his voice both gratifying and painful. "I always thought you were just playing at this." "I know." He ran his hand along a Chippendale chair rail, uncharacteristically thoughtful. "I wanted security for you. Your mother and I both did. We pushed Rachel toward law because it seemed safe. We worried when you chose this path. And now that you know it worked out financially, it's suddenly valid." I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. "That's not fair," he started, then stopped himself. "Actually, maybe it is fair. I should have trusted your judgment more. Seen what you were building here." It wasn't quite an apology, but from my father, it was significant, perhaps the closest acknowledgement I would ever receive that their assessment had been wrong. "Rachel is struggling," he added after a moment. "The new house, private school tuition increases, some investment that didn't pan out. She'd never admit it, but they're overextended." I recognized the implicit question. "I'm not bailing them out, Dad." He nodded, seemingly unsurprised. "Wouldn't expect you to. Just thought you should know." After he left, I sat at my desk considering our conversation. My father's limited recognition of my accomplishments felt like a small victory, but his update about Rachel suggested the family dynamics remained unchanged. Success measured in possessions, worth determined by appearance, and financial decisions driven by status rather than substance. In May, I launched a new initiative that gave me unexpected satisfaction, a scholarship for young entrepreneurs interested in historical preservation and antique businesses. The program would provide both funding and mentorship to individuals demonstrating passion and knowledge in these fields. I structured it through a foundation to maintain my privacy, but the work of reviewing applications and meeting candidates connected me with a community of like-minded individuals who valued what I valued. The first recipient was a 23-year-old woman from Western Massachusetts who had been running a small restoration business from her grandfather's barn. Her knowledge of early American furniture and dedication to preserving traditional craftsmanship techniques impressed the entire selection committee. "I can't believe someone is actually supporting this work," she told me when I called with the news. "Everyone keeps telling me to get a real job instead." I smiled at the familiar refrain. "Trust me, this is as real as jobs get." Summer brought an unexpected development. My cousin Amanda, who had reached out after Thanksgiving, announced she was relocating to Boston for a new position teaching environmental science at MIT. Over dinner at a North End restaurant, we discovered a surprising affinity. Both of us had chosen paths our extended family didn't quite understand. Both valued knowledge over appearance. And both had learned to create boundaries with relatives who recognized only conventional metrics of success. "Rachel was always the same at family reunions," Amanda recalled. "Everything a competition, everything about status." I stopped attending because I got tired of hearing about her house, her car, her children's exclusive summer camps. "Some things never change," I agreed. "But some things do," Amanda countered. "Look at you now, not just financially successful, but doing meaningful work on your terms. That's the real victory." As summer transitioned to fall, I found myself approaching the anniversary of the Thanksgiving revelation with unexpected equanimity. The acute pain had subsided, replaced by occasional melancholy for what might have been but mostly acceptance of what was. I had learned to value the authentic connections in my life more deeply, with colleagues who respected my knowledge, clients who appreciated my expertise, and the small but genuine circle of friends who had known me before and after my financial status was revealed, treating me identically regardless. In September, I received a text message from my mother. Rachel and Derek are separating. Please don't mention I told you. I felt a complex mixture of sympathy and vindication, compassion for the pain their family was experiencing, combined with the uncomfortable recognition that the lifestyle they had prioritized had perhaps contributed to their instability. I sent a brief, neutral message to Rachel expressing concern for her and the children. Her response, the first direct communication in months, was surprisingly vulnerable. Everything's a mess. Kids are struggling. Not how I planned my life to go. 2 days later, I sent a package to her home. Not money, which would have reinforced the dynamic I had fought to change, but 2 carefully chosen books on resilience for the children and a simple note. Sometimes the most valuable things emerge from unexpected change. I'm here if you need me. She didn't acknowledge the gift, but my mother reported that the books remained on their bedside tables. As November approached, bringing the inevitable question of Thanksgiving plans, I made a decision that felt both challenging and right. I invited my parents to Boston for the holiday, neutral territory, just the 3 of us. To my surprise, they accepted. On the morning of Thanksgiving, exactly 1 year after the confrontation that had changed everything, I stood in my kitchen preparing a modest but special meal. The doorbell rang promptly at noon. My parents, punctual as always, bearing a bouquet of fall flowers and a palpable nervousness that matched my own. Your apartment is lovely, my mother said, looking around with genuine interest rather than the evaluation I was accustomed to. Those windows are spectacular. Original to the building, I replied. 1850s glass. My father nodded appreciatively. Good investment, property like this in the North End. Some things changed slowly, if at all. The meal wasn't perfect. Conversations occasionally stalled or veered too close to sensitive topics. My mother still mentioned Rachel's accomplishments too frequently, though she caught herself more than once. My father still struggled to show interest in my work beyond its financial success. But we were trying, all of us, to see each other more clearly, to listen more genuinely. After they left, promising to visit the shop the next day, I stood at my window watching evening descend on the historic street below. The past year had taught me that wealth took many forms: financial security, yes, but also self-knowledge, authentic passion, and the courage to be valued on your own terms. I had lost the illusion of unconditional family support, but gained a clearer understanding of my own worth. The antique dealer in me recognized the irony. Sometimes the most valuable things are those initially dismissed, their true worth apparent only to those with the knowledge to see beyond surface appearances. Like the Revolutionary War document found in a box of old papers or the masterpiece painting leaning against a water heater, my passion and expertise had been overlooked until they produced tangible results the world recognized as valuable. But I had always known their worth, and in that knowledge lay the true fortune I had built, one that could never be demanded, divided, or diminished. If my story resonates with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had family members undervalue your choices until they prove successful? How did you handle it? What boundaries have you created to protect your peace? Hit like and subscribe if you appreciate authentic stories about family dynamics and self-worth. Share with someone who might need to hear that their path matters, even when others don't see its value. Thank you for listening to my journey. May you find the courage to value yourself, regardless of others' opinions.